Finding His Way Home. Written by Delta Capricorni. Read by Arashi. He remembers when he fell in love with them, because it was also the first and only time he lied to them. On an unusually warm morning during the great tree moon, the Golden Deer classroom is abuzz with excited chatter. Stairs normally reserved for him as the hitherto unknown grandson of Duke Regan now fall upon, or carefully avoid, the student's new professor. Were it not for their position as the head of the classroom, they might have been mistaken for a student, hesitant and lost as they seem. Well, this is curious, Claude thinks to himself. You wouldn't think they were the same mercenary that ruthlessly cut down a horde of bandits last night. Good morning, they finally venture. The classroom falls silent for just long enough that it becomes awkward. Their face remains the same, but Claude sees it in their hands, unable to choose between the chalk and the quill. A sword suits them much better. He glances at his deskmate Hilda, sister of Holst Goneril, and busy pretending not to read the atmosphere, before turning back to them. He thinks he understands their predicament. Good morning, Teach, he calls back. All eyes fall on him, just as expected, and he sees their movements still, their chest rising with the deep, calming breath, also according to plan. You may call me Byleth, they continue. The students turn back around and begin to murmur. A much more welcoming thing than dead silence. I will be your house instructor for this year. Claude leans back, satisfied with his work. Hilda elbows him, muttering, teacher's pet, under her breath, and then giggling so he knows it's not malicious. Calculative, just like him. He appreciates it. He jolts upright at their next line. Why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves? Name, hometowns, anticipated weapon of choice. There is no reason for him to worry. His story is practiced, well worn almost. He was simply Claude von Regan of Deirdre, the hidden grandson of Duke Regan, who would never have considered that most coveted seat at the round table were not for Godfrey Regan's tragic. The hidden grandson of Duke Regan, who would never have considered that most coveted seat at the round table were not for Godfrey Regan's tragic accident. One by one the deer introduce themselves. This is only for Byleth's benefit, so he doesn't pay attention. He glances at Marianne, whose visible trembling at the prospect of public speaking is much more convincing testimony to her own sheltered life. Should he add a bit of performative flair to his own introduction as well? Not like he isn't already always performing a caricature of himself. Leonie practically shouts from her seat behind him, I'm Leonie Pinelli, first member of the Sarin Village to ever make it to the Officers' Academy, and I'm going to study the lance and become just like Captain Gerald, so you better be good at teaching, Professor. Byleth nods just as minutely as they did to every other student's response, making notes on a peach of parchment. They look up, scanning the room for the next student. Their eyes meet him. You? Me? Claude responds. Beside him, Hilda blinks once. Twice. Claude hears Lawrence choke on his spit a few tables away. For Claude may be easygoing, but no one at Garrigmach is so far as to dare refer so directly, so impolitely to the heir of the apparent Leicester alliance. Claude, right? They reply. Hometown? Anticipated weapon of choice? It's an unusually warm morning, that great tree moon, but hot weather is normally no sweat for Claude, so he doesn't know why he's burning up right now. It's his turn to take a deep breath and hope his face shows nothing. That's right, Teach. I'm Claude von Regan of Deirdre, and I'm proficient with the bow and sword. 2 weapons, huh? Fancy pants. Hilda smirks, and the class seems to collectively exhale. Well then, I'm Hilda Valentine Goneril, from none other than, the Duchy of Goneril, and I guess I can kind of use an axe. But that's also kind of a lot of work, and... He tunes out the rest of Hilda's wheedling, focusing on Teach. He'd lied to her face. Could they tell? Would they care, even if they could? The Ashen Demon who slaughtered without discrimination, the teacher who spoke to him as an equal. Of his classmates, only he had seen the demon in action, and perhaps only he would recognize the hidden ability that lay beneath their inexperience with teaching. The heat dissipates from his mind as the sun shines ever brighter outside. The lie he is comfortable with. The cause, that too. The person he lied to, though. He shakes that thought away. He came to Garrigmach, and how fortunate it was that he encountered such a powerful individual, even more so that they became his house professor. The winds of change, he thinks, are finally blowing in his favor. He can imagine a path towards a future he wants, a path that Byleth will help carve out for him, a path that might someday connect Fodlan to Almyra, and maybe lead him to a place he might call home. He had wanted to use them to his ends, yes, but when they plummeted down that bottomless gorge, for the first time, he not only was lost, but he had lost something so precious to him that he couldn't imagine how to regain his bearings. Never mind the danger now looming over the continent he'd immigrated to. The monastery had fallen, and his classmates, turned friends, turned enemies, had now scattered to the winds, for safety or for bloodshed. Claude emerges from underneath a pile of rubble at the base of the river. He dunks his face in the river, at first scrubbing the dirt and blood caked onto his skin, then letting himself sit there in a suffocating kind of mourning. When Byleth fell, he knew it was over, and he gave a secret signal to his fellow deer to flee for home. As long as we're alive, we haven't lost, he told them on the eve of the war, but as he ducked past monsters and bodies, he couldn't help but feel the pangs of betrayal at abandoning his... He gasps and surfaces for air, rubbing his eyes. The monastery, painfully crumbled, still smoking, completely still, comes into view. The gurgling of the river fades away as the specters of hundreds who died just yesterday and thousands more to come in the next 5 years seem to loom over the skeletons of Garreg Mach, the ruins of a place he almost came to call home. Almost. Right now he isn't filled with anger or frustration, though he knows he will be once he's back on his feet and on the battlefront. Right now, he only feels regret. He regrets that he'd grown so close to someone and took them for granted, took their usefulness in his schemes for granted, and took their friendship for granted, and took their invincibility for granted. And now, they're gone. Teach is gone. Part of him wants to search along the river. Part of him knows he needs to get to Deirdre and save his friends. Leicester might not be his home. Fodlan might not welcome him, but he has to protect them. If only for Byleth's sake. They weren't gone. They couldn't be. He refuses to think any further. He never understood so clearly the meaning, has never heard so clearly the sound of dead silence. He is alone in the Goddess Tower, itself threatening to crumble with every stair he climbs. At the summit, there is only a gaping hole where the balcony should have been, where he and Byleth once stood, in the heat of their exhilarations mingling in the frosty midnight air of the ethereal moon. But it allows the light of dawn to flood in uninhibited, illuminating the dust like specks of gold. The world is open to him. He hears measured footsteps echoing across the empty tower. His heart leaps. An enemy? It could be an Imperial spy, or a kingdom assassin gone rogue, or even a shadow from his Almiran past. He does the opposite of what he's been doing for the past 5 years. He closes his eyes and breathes. Claude? It's Byleth. Teach! Stars above. It's Byleth. He wants to shout and cry. He wants to hold them and never let them go. He wants to push them away. He wants to let out the 5 years of pent-up rage and disappointment and fear. He wants to make sure they're real. He doesn't want to wake up from this dream. He feels lost. But they came and found him. So instead he says, "What took you so long?" And Byleth rushes to him like a summer gale. They wrap their arms tight around each other and press their foreheads together, letting their breath mingle in the wintry air of dawn. This person, whom he treated like a tool for a scheme far too long back when he was a starry-eyed student, this friend who never saw him as less than equal, as more than human, as just Claude, had come back to him. They came back for him. He vows to never lose sight of them again. Nemesis, the Fell King, is finally dead. This isn't the end. Claude and Byleth both know. After Edelgard, and before Nemesis, they and the other Golden Deer and the monastery leaders had met over many long nights, discussing how to preserve peace in Fodland, whether it meant completely reconstructing what Fodland even was.
"I believe there's truth to Edelgard's ideology," Lysithea had declared. "Although her methods are deplorable and the thousands of lives lost will never be recovered, please believe me when I say there is truth to her words. The system of crests and powers must be destroyed."
"I mean, sure, I'm all for equality and other ways of being strong and stuff, but," Raphael's grin wavered, "how do we make sure no one gets hurt when we get rid of whatever we had now?" Lawrence pounded his fist on the table. "Exactly!" he shouted. "Whose responsibility will it be to protect those who are powerless in the first place? The crest-based system certainly has its faults, but it is also intended to hold those with crests accountable for the safety of those without." "People need someone to look up to," acknowledged Ignatz. "We've always trusted the goddess and the archbishop. We can't simply do away with them. If we want to turn over the system, we need to start with a new leader, a new image, a new imagery, someone who can bring us to a new dawn." All eyes turned to Claude, but he was looking elsewhere. He had always been gazing somewhere else. At someone else. He might have said some lofty words in the moment to reassure everyone of his continued leadership.
But they knew it couldn't be him. Not for Lester. Not him for Fodland. If he wanted peace here, and peace in Elmira too, he would have to give up the one he treasured most. Byleth. Nemesis is dead, but even as he extends his hand to help Byleth to their feet, he scans his surroundings to find a sea of blood and waves of pale faces staring back at him. He already knows this is no home for him. Not yet. Maybe never. He has to go. It's for some lofty goal, a secret scheme he's tucked away so deeply in the impenetrable labyrinth of his mind that he doesn't realize it's even there until he has to explain himself over formal missives and lonely years. And even then, you're leaving? Their voice is small, even in the confines of the Goddess Tower. That twinge of hurt, that sense of understanding nonetheless, makes him writhe inside. He hates himself so much, but if he doesn't leave now, he thinks he'll never have a place to return to. Not there in Elmira, not here in Fodland. My presence would only impede your budding image as the new Archbishop. I know this role isn't exactly what you want, but we know it's what Fodland needs right now. Not me. And there's something else I have to do. Elsewhere. He can't bring himself to say home, because it's not. Somehow. But I'll be back by your side before I know it. The next time I see you, I won't leave your side again. Never again. I promise. Violet says something. Their hands find his, warm in the secrecy of night, and slip a ring onto his finger. It belonged to their mother, he knows, and it's too small to fit on any finger other than his left pinky. But it rests there snugly. In turn, he slides a keepsake of his father's, suitable only for their right thumb. I promise, he repeats. He may never return to this place, but he won't lose them. Never again. A messenger rushes into the king's audience hall of the Grand Palace, clad head to toe in the white veils of wyvern riders crossing the Almiran deserts. Outside, their steed lows in exhaustion and settles down on the cool marble steps leading to the audience hall, refusing to yield to the guard's attempts to move her to the side. King Khalid smiles to himself at the sight before assuming his trademark neutral visage. Your Majesty! The messenger pants and falls more than kneels, while offering a wax-sealed parchment in both hands. A message from the embassy at the throat. Urgent to read, but not to respond. Khalid receives the scroll, meanwhile calling for servants to attend to and whisk away the rider, and hopefully their wyvern too. There is no scheduled formal communication between Elmira and Fodland, and the paper is curiously thin. When the hall falls quiet, he tears at the wax and unfurls the scroll. The Archbishop has stepped down. The Church of Saros has been dissolved. His heart stops. Urgent to read, but not to respond. He turns the scroll over, looking for any more words. A hint. Anything. He runs to a nearby lamp to wave it over a candle, but the heat reveals nothing. He paces. He sits. He buries his face in his hands. King Khalid is at a loss. He feels lethargic, like the malaise of the past 10 years has seeped into his blood. What are they scheming? Where did they go? And can he go too? Wait, what is he thinking? He is the king of Elmira, the place where he was born, and the place over which he rules now. He won't leave. He can't. Where would they even go? The moon has risen on high by the time he unburies his face from his hands. The beat of leathery wings catches his attention once more, but it's a different wyvern rider this time. Wait, isn't that his wyvern? She was gentle enough to be set free after the war, kind enough to always return to him after a long pre-regeneration, alongside the wild members of her species. Now at the palace, her brilliant scales shimmer like pearls under the cold light of the moon. Unmistakably his wyvern, yes, but she has only ever allowed 2 riders the honor of riding her. Khalid himself, and the riders clad head to toe in black veils suited for flying across the desert. But this is no mere messenger. The way they approach the throne betrays no intent. Under those clothes, there could be deadly weapons. Or maybe the scroll from before had been laced with poison, and they're here to finish the job. There is only the sound of measured footsteps, echoing across the empty hall. He closes his eyes and sits on his throne, feeling smaller than anything. He thinks of the guiding light of stars above. He breathes. Claude. The figure standing before him drops their hood, but he had already figured out who it was. Teach, you're here. He stands, feeling shaky. One strong hand grips his forearm. Another arm wraps around his back to bring him close. I'm sorry, I promised I'd return to your side.
I got lost. They hug even more tightly, reassuring him in their presence, their reality. It's okay. The truth is, I couldn't wait, so I came to you instead. The two pull apart, hands lingering along each other's forearms. Byleth kisses him on the cheek. He reciprocates. They listen to Khalid's wyvern shifting into a more comfortable position outside. Where's next? He finds himself saying. What? Khalid is surprised too, and yet he's always known this isn't where he wants to be. It isn't the viritle of ignorant people, nor the novelty of the country on the other side of the mountains, for Elmira came to love him, and through him came to accept Fodlan too. No, he realizes, it's him. It's the part of him that decides how long ago he became Claude. To be free. He doesn't know if he deserves leave with them now. I didn't dissolve the church in one mere flight of fancy, they remind him, almost reluctantly. And I didn't spend the last several years setting up a new but straightforward system of checks and balances to make sure Elmira wouldn't fall to pieces if its king were to abdicate, he replies. Or did I? He rests his hands along their face, and they press their glowing smiles into his palm. You're keeping your promise? Of course. Who do you think I am? Claude von Regan of Deirdre, proficient with the bow and sword. You got it, Teach. Now? And his hand traces a delicate line from their cheek to their arm to their hand, warm in the cool desert night. To where shall we fly? I finally found it, after all this time. Claude and Byleth are soaring through the skies atop their shining white wyvern, the warmth of the sunlight kissing their skin. He has always loved flying. From up high looking down, he never saw any borders, only the political factions that dissipated among the trees and mountains. And now he gets to fly with the love of his life tucked neatly behind him, arms wrapped around his waist. Found what? They murmur into his neck, sheltering their whisper from the whistling winds. Home. Fodland? Elmira? Neither. Where then? They're older now, older than when they left their posts to the will of the people, who cultured folk tales of their former leaders checking on their nation so often to make sure that things were still going okay, though such rumors remained mostly unconfirmed. They've traveled far beyond the seas surrounding Brigid or to the plains of Dusker, and they've explored the nooks and crannies of Fodland on Elmira to accept their endless possibilities. And yet, there's never been one place in particular that has called to them, befit a wandering mercenary perhaps, but for Claude, at least, home is wherever you are. He shifts his wyvern reins into one hand to grasp Byleth's hand with the other. Their rings glitter under the moonlight. I'm home. And Byleth squeezes his hand back. Welcome home, my love.